You're listening to episode 63 of the Confident Writer podcast with Jane Pike. Hello, fabulous human. How goes it out there today? I've been wrestling between a couple of different topics for this particular episode, and I think I've decided on one. But where I want to begin actually relates, ironically, to neither of those, and it's all about uncertainty, because the practice at the moment, definitely for me, so maybe I should just speak from my own personal experience, but the practice at the moment really is, how is it that I can hold uncertainty in my body and not feel the need to grapple for an answer, to move too quickly to what I might perceive to be a better feeling place, or to even distract myself by becoming overly busy or just diving into a specific task so I can avoid the discomfort that comes with being able to rest in that feeling. And so much of 2020, so much of everything that's been happening really directly feeds back to how good, quote unquote, we are at being able to sit with uncertainty. And as a human species, I would say we're not very good at it, because we have been trained to think that the goal is comfort, that the end point, if we are doing it right and if we are successful and if we have our shit together, is that we're going to feel good and that we're going to feel comfortable. A huge turning point in my own personal progression, I don't know if that's the right word, but kind of like feeling like I've got somewhere and made sense of something, is to really understand that comfort isn't the goal. That discomfort does not necessarily indicate that I'm moving in the wrong direction, and that my ability to hold that discomfort within the edges of my skin means that I am learning to ground and center in the midst of that, and as a consequence, I gift myself with the capacity and the ability for that experience to be transformative, as opposed to trying to move too quickly through it or ignore it or kind of gloss over it so I don't have to be with it. And that's something that I'm finding myself periodically dropping into. How can I be with this discomfort? This doesn't feel good. How can I stay with this without trying to fix it or escape from it, which is really typically the tendency, right? Really typically the tendency. And we are fed this idea that feeling good means that you've got it right. Feeling not so good means that you've got it wrong. And that causes us to be on this constant hamster wheel cycle of really blocking out the stuff which feels difficult and then craving with a certain degree of desperation the stuff that feels good. The constant, or I guess the consequence cycle that comes from that then feeds into this idea that good feeling and good sensation mean that you are in life, and those things should be celebrated and fed and really magnified to the full extent that's possible. And then everything that feels difficult should be blocked out or avoided or skipped around. And there's so many problems within that way of functioning, in that you can't block out things on one end of the scale, meaning that you can't avoid the hard stuff on the one end of the scale and not have that have a subsequent effect on the other end of the scale. So if I'm blocking out things that I would perceive to be hard, then I'm automatically limiting my window on the other end of the spectrum in terms of what feels good. So our ability to be in life means that we need to really grow adept at holding space for, at welcoming, which feels kind of bizarre, welcoming these difficult feelings, these difficult sensations, these difficult experiences, and not deeming any of them unacceptable. We need to be able to do that so that we can learn to maintain our own agency in the midst of that stuff. That is the gold. What I've really noticed over the course of doing the work that I'm doing, and this relates also directly to my own experience, so I'm not like professing to be Buddha over here looking at everyone else struggling. Oh no, the work I do is actually primarily selfish. It's like, how do I fix this? How do I get myself into this different position? But what we've been trained out of, especially women, I'm going to say that, is being able to mobilize our own agency under stress. So what I mean by that is, here I am feeling this difficult experience or being put in this difficult position. And as a consequence of that, I feel like I need to shut down or mute that experience in some way, or morph like a chameleon to align myself with whatever it is that feels safe, even if that is in direct conflict with what I actually want and what it is that I value. So that fawning response, where I choose to align myself with the person or situation in power as a survival mechanism. So further on from that, and we are going to get into what it is I plan to talk about today, what has become so starkly apparent to me is that it's really important for us to recognize the work that we're doing on ourselves. So what I mean by that is, when we're engaged in any kind of personal development, personal awareness, self-awareness work, and we really take self-responsibility to resource ourselves so that we're able to stay responsive, we're able to stay tuned in, we're able to stay present in the midst of our experiences, so that when we're in relationship with someone that we love or someone that's important to us, we can hold difficult conversations or difficult experiences and still be in charge of where it is we're directing that energy, right? The energy of that experience doesn't get bigger than our body, because when it gets bigger than our body, that's when we actually lose the capacity to direct that energy intentionally. And obviously, in my area of specialism, I am working on that in relationship with our horses, but it feeds through to everything. It feeds through to absolutely everything. So the reason I'm bringing this up is because a lot of what we have been fed, a lot of what we have been taught, is all about individual change, individual expression, and how it is if you're experiencing something which doesn't sit well with you, that if you change yourself, then the outside world is going to match up to that experience. And what I want to say is that the individual agency, the individual work, and the individual change that you do is absolutely the foundational piece, is an integral piece. However, we are also in amidst this cultural paradigm. We are also in amidst structures which exert their force on us in different ways as well. So if we use the example of I don't feel good enough, there is an individual ramification of holding that belief system in your body. But what I notice, given that it is so prevalent, it's not just one person, it's not just a handful of people that feel that way, it's pretty much everyone that I come into contact with. And what that tells me is that there is a wider social framework in place that is raining down on us and causing us also to feel the way that we do. So the reason that that is important to understand, the reason that we need to be aware of the structures and cultures and systems that we are a part of, is to understand that as we do the individual personal change, as we work on, change is not even a word I like, as we work to integrate the things which might be holding us back from really being able to express ourselves to the fullest extent possible, or show up in the world in a way that allows us to take up all the space that's owed to us, we really need to understand that as we step into that, there will be kickback. There is kickback from the structures. There is kickback from the social systems. There is kickback from the cultures that we are a part of that will tell us in fairly no uncertain terms whether or not that is okay. And what I see time and time again is that we are beating ourselves up by engaging in this change work. Again, don't like the word change, but like engaging in this work where we're trying to really integrate that and do what we need to do on a personal level to be showing up in the way that we want to show up. And as we do that, we're kind of expecting that things are going to flow in a way that feels good or better, or where our experience feels more easeful. And I want to say, unfortunately, that is not always the case. That the change work that comes on an individual level can be in deference to, but also antagonistic to, some of the social frameworks that exist or linger from previous ways of going about things. And gender is one such example of this. You know, like you can... As a woman, I understand that there are certain social and cultural constructs that I will come up against that absolutely impact the way that I'm able to do my work in the world. Now, being would I say I'm an entrepreneur? I guess I'm an entrepreneur. I have my own business, right? So I have my own business. I'm not answerable to anyone. So I have this massive amount of liberation that exists within my own office where I can make decisions and I can decide what it is I want to do and kind of put that out in the world, and that is what it is, right? Now that meets, as soon as I send those things out, that meets whatever it meets on the outside that informs people's decisions about whether or not they want to get involved with me. But I don't have these immediate structures around me which perhaps dampen my voice or limit my capacity in some way, except for the ones I have internalized as a result of growing up as a female. Now, other people, we've had conversations in Joyride recently with incredible women that are part of professions such as science and tech, professions that have typically been male-oriented up to a point and have been overseen or left out of promotions, have been pushed to the side in situations where they have the same qualifications as their male counterparts, and yet they have been overlooked for the same opportunities, so on and so forth, right? So this is not a new story. I know a lot of you are going to be, unfortunately, nodding your heads and empathizing with what it is that I'm talking about. But in this situation, I'm using it as an example to say, you can do the work to be skilled and competent and professional and use your voice and show up in all of the ways that you know how to show up. And yet, these systemic structures are going to be in place that you are going to experience kickback from, right? And the reason I use this as an example is that, yes, our own individual work needs change work, integration, all of that stuff needs to be done. But what we need to unite as a collective for is to strengthen the overall effect of that so that we can show up in a much bigger way and then start to really deconstruct some of these bigger forces that are at play that have in the first instance made us feel a certain way, but in the second instance kind of provide these invisible barriers that seem very hard to traverse. This is a really important conversation because, I don't know if I've already said this, I'm kind of getting a little bit passionate now, but what is commonly purported and put forward and promoted in the world that I'm in, if that is a world, like the self-development world, is that if you do your own stuff, if you do your own work, then that is it. That is the be all and end all. And what I want to say is that is a part of it, but we cannot ignore the wider systems that we're a part of that will ultimately impact that showing up. And as a consequence of that, this is really where I'm heading, I don't want you to then internalize those systemic structures as a failure on your part to have done that work well. You can do your own work well. You can work with the negative beliefs. You can work with the limiting beliefs. You can understand how your traumatic stress history has impacted the way that you are able to do things and mobilize and respond, right? You can do all that stuff. And in addition to that, we need to have this buffer zone for ourselves that will allow us to move in the world in a realistic way that understands there are systemic and structural limitations in place that will tell you that you're still doing it wrong. You are not doing it wrong. This is the work, right? There is the work on the individual level. There is the work on the bigger level of structural and cultural paradigms that are influencing how it is we are operating. And for those of us that are really connecting to ourselves and learning to ground in the midst of this big stuff, and that's new to us, that awareness or understanding can be really destabilizing. I don't mean for this to be depressing. I don't mean for this to sort of sound like, okay, you can do your own work and then go out there and actually there's going to be stuff that's really hard to get through anyway, just as a result of the systems and structures. But that is an awareness that's important to have, right? Because it's an awareness that tells us this is not all on you, right? This is not all on you. Please don't internalize what it is that's going on as part of it as a personality flaw or defect, because we are a part of a bigger ecosystem, and that bigger ecosystem needs to be taken care of and needs to be taken into account when we're looking at how it is we are in the world and how it is we kind of move through the world, right? Even if we were to relate this back to our horses, there are frequent discussions I have with people who have switched from perhaps a more transactional way of engaging with their horses and showing up in the world, meaning that, previously perhaps they didn't really give their horse much thought in terms of how they felt about things. And it's not that they were coming from a place that was ill-intentioned or where they didn't really love their horse. It's just that wasn't part of the educational or training model that they worked with. And then usually there's an event, there's some kind of pivot point where something happens that's kind of really forced them to move out of that space and think about things in a different way. And as a consequence, they have moved into a way of engaging with their horse that's really transformational, that focuses on how it is their horse actually feels about the situation that they're in, that is really cultivating a relationship that's coming from a completely different place. Now, if you think about that, what that challenges is everything that came before. The relationships, the coaching relationships, the training relationships, the relationships at the yard or the barn they're a part of, the friendships even, the family relationships if they are people that train in a certain way as well. These are all things that are going to be, what's the word I'm looking for? I'm sort of doing an action, but none of you can see that. It's like you hit a translucent edge of a translucent bubble. There's blowback, there's kickback from that. And so we have to acknowledge that as we decide on a way of going about things that aligns with our own values and how it is we want to train, ride, and be as horse men and women, that there is going to be these other structures and other whirlpools of thought that will inevitably come into contact with us. And so part of the way that we resource ourselves has to understand and incorporate what is important to me, how is it that I am going to really recognize the ways and means that I can stay in alignment with what's important to me and continue to move in integrity with that, whilst also acknowledging that that doesn't mean that this is going to create the most easeful experience possible. That moving in my own integrity and even moving in my own empowerment does not mean it's going to be easier, unfortunately. And so if we can let go of this idea of things being easier or things needing to be comfortable or things feeling good as the goal, I think that really opens the door for so much more transformation, because we are in the eye of the storm and yet we are centered, we are rooted, we are anchored, we are allowing ourselves to be transformed from that as opposed to whipped up into the ether and kind of flung in any which way direction the outside environment would have us go. That's my practice at the moment. That is my practice. And that was nothing that I planned to talk about today, 20 minutes later, as it often goes. What I did plan to talk about was movement and how movement-based practices have come to inform my work, and also the joy of movement. And I lie, actually. I tell you a big porky in that what I have just talked about does actually relate to this, because everything relates to that conversation. And why that relates is because I would like you to consider now, before I talk more about what movement means to me, I would like you to consider now what first comes into your mind when you think about the word movement. And for most of all of us, it's going to be fairly closely linked to exercise. So then what we're going to dissect is, what does exercise mean to you? And again, I would hasten a guess to say that most of all of us have a complicated relationship with exercise. I know I certainly have, and that is because of these, not only our individual associations, but also these wider frameworks that we're a part of that really tell us that we need to be fixed or changed in some way, or that hold up an idealistic view of what our body might need to look like, that has rained down on us from the moment that we are born and caused us to have fairly often, do I want to use that word, abusive, often irreverent, or let's just use the word complicated again, complicated relationships with our bodies. Yeah. So if I take you back, again, I'll just use myself as an example, and I think about what my previous relationship to exercise has been up until relatively recently. It's been very transactional in that I would do an activity to get a result. Yeah, not for the love of the activity so much, except for riding. I always really loved riding as an activity that I could engage for the joy of it. You know, there's something really incredible about that experience that I know I don't have to really explain, because all of you listening will understand what that is, and that is why we are so addicted to it. But if I think about my transactional relationship with exercise, it's me engaging in this activity to produce a certain result, and the motivation for that result comes from the idea that I am not good enough the way that I am now. So exercise for me has often been a practice of self-flagellation, where I would force myself to do an activity. I would engage in that activity even if I was exhausted or depleted or really had done enough that day. So it wasn't anything about engaging in life to its fullness. It wasn't about feeling into the edges of my skin and noticing the own strength and amazingness that each of our own human bodies holds. It wasn't about that. It was about, I'm not this or I'm not that. I'm not skinny enough or I'm not voluptuous enough or I'm not strong enough. I'm just not good enough the way that I am now. We all have this ideal that we hold up in our minds, even unconsciously, that we're fed, right? So this doesn't come from a place of sort of intrinsic knowing. It's a culturally and socially positioned ideal that tells us what it is that we should look like. And I'm going to speak from the position of women, but I know this is not an exclusive conversation to women. I'm just going to speak about it because I am one and the majority of people I work with are women. To say that women especially are in this double bind where it's like, you should be this way, which is like slim, but you should also be voluptuous and you should also be, warm and you should also be embracing and all of these things. So it's like these ridiculous ideals about body image and shape, which, again, not a new conversation, but I'm just thinking about it and dissecting it from a personal point of view in terms of how that has impacted our relationship with exercise and our relationship with movement, and then the consequent evolution for me out of that space. So very much about recognizing my body as not okay and really I don't even know what I was trying to be, but whatever it was not what I was then. I was essentially trying to escape myself. And I think that also my relationship with exercise and food, and those two things tend to get coupled fairly closely together, has been one of control, in that lots of elements in my life, in my teens and in my 20s, felt especially out of control. And so those were the things that I grabbed onto to really bring that control back, where I could be very strict, I could be very regimented about how I approached both food and exercise. And within that, I allowed myself to contain everything that felt so wildly out of control and channeled all of that energy into those two areas of my life. Not in a healthy way, I will say as well, not in a healthy way. What's really interesting to observe, and I've really only come into this understanding recently as well, in terms of like, I feel it, I don't just logically understand it, is that body image is so subjective. Like, there actually is no one ideal that everyone will agree to is the good thing, right? It's wildly subjective in that I can be standing in a room, and this has actually happened, right? I can be standing in a room and one person will come over and go, wow, you look really great. Have you have you lost weight? Have you put on weight? Whichever seems relevant to them at the time. And then another person come over and say, wow, Jane, come over to the buffet. Like, you really need to eat a hamburger, and so on and so forth. And it's like, I'm the same person. Nothing has changed. And yet there's 3 or 4 different opinions about how I look, all unsolicited, all uninvited, that seem to be, sent to me. And what that kind of pinged off in my head was like, I'm still here, and yet which of these am I trying to live up to, right? Which of these is going to be the marker for me? Because everyone has a different idea about how I should look and consequently how they should look. Now, I don't want to kind of get into a conversation about weight, because it's really not about that. It's about how it is we perceive ourselves and how it is we're engaging in our bodies and with our bodies in life and with our horses. And movement for me has become renegotiating my relationship with movement and actually developing a different definition of what the purpose of my body and being is. I know that sounds kind of deep, has been huge. So maybe we should start from that place. So previously, we've always had, or many of us have had, this relationship with our bodies, which sees it as kind of like separate from our overall being. We've kind of treated it in a certain way. We have abused it. We've overworked it. We have undernourished it. We have overexercised it. We've underexercised it. Like, there are so many different ways that we have had this disconnection with our body and treated it like it's something that we can contort and control, right? And what I have really come to understand through my work and education and learning about the nervous system is that ultimately we are never trying to work against ourselves, right? We're always working for our own highest benefit, even if that does not make conscious sense. So everything I'm doing in every moment is actually my best attempt within the resources that I have available to me to keep me safe. So let's use that example of control, of me manipulating my exercise and my food as a means of control. At the time, I didn't have healthy resources that would allow me to navigate the life experience that was coming my way in a way that was loving and compassionate to myself. I didn't have that skill set. I didn't have that available. And so what my body searched for was the next best thing it could grab onto to give me some form of relief in that situation. And for me, that was controlling exercise and food. Now, if we zoom out from that picture, we can understand that really that wasn't the best way of going about things, you know. However, it got me through. It was a survival resource that got me through to the next stage. And when I am in a different position where I have different awarenesses, different understandings, and different resources, I can make different decisions about what actually I can do to honor my whole self and negotiate those same stresses and traumas in a completely different way, right? So if you come from everything that you've done in your past, your relationship with yourself, your relationship with exercise, with movement, with food, if you come at it from that position by saying, thank you so much, that was really hard, that was a really tough experience, and yet your body put you in a position of grappling for whatever it was it could grapple for to get you through that. What a smart body we have to do that, to allow us to survive some of the tough stuff. And now we have to honor it by saying, we can look after you in a different way. We can look after ourselves in a different way, in a way that is compassionate, in a way that is loving, in a way that has reverence for everything that we are. And that also allows us to bring our whole selves to the experience also in a way that doesn't degrade ourselves, that doesn't deny ourselves, that doesn't diminish ourselves or anyone or anything around us. So my work starts from that place. Everyone that comes to me, regardless of their story, when I hear their story, I'm like, amazing that you got through that you're here now. Those are the skills that you've had. Now what can we do to make this a different experience? And for myself, where I might have had a degree of self-loathing or even disgust or kind of sadness about how I treated myself in the past, I can now look back with a different set of eyes and go, we got it. We made it through. We got through. It might not have been the ideal, but here we are. And now we have a different set of opportunities. We have a different set of choices. What is it that we're going to do now? And how incredible is it that our bodies have the resilience and the strength really to hold us through that hard stuff, to let us navigate some of these messages and ideals and stereotypes that have been thrown at us from every direction. And yet here we are. We're still here. We have a new day, a new moment, a new set of options to say, how can we do this differently, and how can we pass on the knowledge of doing it differently to everyone that we come into contact with? So that's my hope. And that leads me into movement as a means of really engaging in life, as bringing us back into conscious relationship with our bodies, as a tool and a resource to stay within our window of presence, and an entry point really to unlock greater possibility. That is my relationship with movement now. So when I'm asked what I do, it used to be that I said, I'm a mindset coach, I'm a mental skills coach, yada, yada. I was quite pleased with that. It gave me like a really nice little succinct title to work with that most people could understand and kind of give me context for. And now I'm like, well, part of what I do is mindset, but the body-based work, the somatic work is a huge piece. Perhaps even my favorite piece. And the movement-based practices that I use are ways of engaging in our body, with our body rather, that allows us to learn how to center and ground in the midst of big experiences and big emotions, and gives us the capacity to channel and direct that energy in an intentional way so that we're actually mastering the physiology of emotions. And when we can master the physiology of an emotion, then we can decide how it is we want to respond to it. Right? So that is what movement unlocks for me. It is a way of really showing up and resourcing ourselves with skills that are really accessible in the moment and really powerful in terms of how it is we can move and operate and show up with our horses, and how it is also we can deconstruct some of the patterns that are keeping us stuck. So if we move into freeze, if we move into shutdown, if we move into collapse, there are ways of really working with the body that allows us to dive under the edges of those habitual responses or reactions so that we can create a reparative nervous system experience and go about things in a different way. So I've let go of movement necessarily meaning exercise. I don't actually exercise in a really structured way anymore, and that doesn't mean that I'm not active. But it means that I've lost or I've dropped this very rigid framework for myself that tells me that I have to do or I should do, or I'm kind of forcing myself to do this activity that is not connected to a feeling state that really allows for some kind of joy or curiosity or exploration, right? So, for instance, the other day I went for a run, and I went for a run because I had this urge to move my body. I didn't go for a run because I'm like, I haven't gone for a run yet, and if I don't go for a run, then I can't eat that food tonight because this means this and this, or, or if I don't go for a run, I'm going to get unfit, and then maybe I won't be able to fit into those jeans, or, this is like, none of that enters my brain space anymore. It is, my body needs to move. I need to be outside. I need to be in relationship with nature. I just want to move. And I went for a run and it felt amazing. And when I wanted to walk, I walked. And when I wanted to jog, I jogged. And when I wanted to run faster, I ran faster. There was no predefined idea about what that run had to look like. And it was enjoyable because you start to really understand your body in a different way and interpret the sensations in a different way, which really allows movement to be a portal to understanding the whole of your life in a different manner. Now, the work that I do in my actual program, so say in Joyride, has nothing to do with running, but has to do with using movement and movement-based activity to really refine and develop a different level of nuance for our sensation and feeling world. So how is it that we can understand when our system is revving up, when that activation level is really building within us, and how is it that we can also become sensitized to when it's settling or when it's dropping back down? And when you develop that degree of sensitivity to yourself, then you can start to translate that to other areas of your life. Say, when I'm doing some groundwork with my horse, how is it that I am feeling before I actually ask for a transition? Am I asking from that hamster wheel place, or am I asking from a place of settling? And then beyond that, how do I actually transfer, or how do I create an internal world that is stabilized, even if the outside world is moving quite fast? So I've talked about this in other podcasts where I think there was a lot of mention of this in the I'm Afraid to Canter podcast, where we can be moving with a huge amount of power on the outside, but that doesn't mean that our internal world has to be humming or revving at the same rate. It's how is it that we can stabilize ourselves to ground and center in the midst of that experience and still be traveling with a huge amount of power and energy on the outside. That's kind of where we're moving to with it. So the movement work in the first instance is developing dual awareness. It's how is it that I can train my brain to recognize that there is more than one thing available to me at the same time. So that if I'm habitually focused on what it is that's going wrong, habitually focused on something that's concerning me, for instance, movement-based work gives us access to understandings where we can learn to multitask our awareness, where we can drop our attention into different spaces and realize that actually if I feel this one thing, then I'm able to move horizontally to recognize that there is another thing available to me at the same time. From that space, we start to uncouple or really move apart this intrinsic relationship that so many of us have developed with activation or with intensity or with energy in the body to feeling like we are under threat or compromised in some way. And we do that by starting to reassociate or renegotiate the emotional labels that we have, the titles or the subjects or the descriptions that we give to how it is that we're feeling. And if we can renegotiate those to something that's actually working in our favor, for instance, if I see my increased heart rate, if I see my activation of energy in the body as something that shows that I am getting ready to do something hard, that shows I'm increasing my resilience, increasing my personal power, then our association with that feeling comes to be one that's really positive and actually works for us, as opposed to taking us down that rabbit hole of feeling like we need to escape the situation. And from there, then we move into this place of really inviting activation into the body so that we're learning, like I said previously, to master the physiology of it, as opposed to feeling like we need to flee or shut it down or somehow remove ourselves from that experience. So the movement work and my relationship with movement has become one of curiosity and exploration, where I'm not looking to do it as a result of me. That wasn't the right way of saying it, but I'm engaging in movement as a way to re-engage in life and to reconnect to my body. And it's become such a massive part, like I said, of my work, but also of my own enjoyment through the day, where I have developed this new relationship with movement-based activity as a means to really keep myself within my window of tolerance and within my window of presence, and to develop some resources where if I feel myself getting to that line where I have the discernment to say, I think things could go either way here, that I have something that draws me back in, that recenters me, that places my feet back on the ground, literally and metaphorically, and reconnects me to my center and my backbone. So it's such a blessing. I'm going to consider this to be part one of our conversation because I have so much more to say about this topic, but I think that I've probably left you with a lot of different subjects and thoughts and ideas that have come together, hopefully in some kind of cohesive whole, and that, will just basically give you some ideas about how it is I'm incorporating movement into my work and how it is you could perhaps think about utilizing your own relationship with movement and exercise to be something that's really joy-filled and engaging and basically an adventure. So guys, that's it from me today. Thank you so much for hanging out again. It's been such a pleasure. This podcast was a winding road of different thoughts. And I hope that you managed to stick with me as we walked it together. But if not, I totally let you off the hook. If you're wanting to work together, you can jump on my website, confidentwriter.online, and check it out there. I've got a variety of different things on offer, including a training session, a live training session next month on goals, horses, and the nervous system. If the old way of goal setting and going about planning really doesn't float your boat, then you are in the right place, because it doesn't float mine over either. You can check that out on my website, confidentwriter.online. And of course, if you want to join my membership program, then that is the place to visit as well. Have a great rest of your day, team. I will catch you on the flip side.